Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to have this amazing seminar with our lovely host, Kelly Thorne, and to all of you for your interest in this year's Cognac Connection. We are thrilled because this seminar is really at the core of what we do with this program. It's education, and every year I love learning about more and more about this topic and tasting new things and just kind of really unlocking a lot of the flavors and the beauty of Cognac. So we are just to follow up with all of our social media here. You can follow us at Cognac USA. That is a great place for you to be able to find out what's going on, to remind you of your deadlines, to just kind of get some inspiration and follow what's going on and other content. Our hashtags here are Cognac USA and Cognac Connection. So please use those hashtags when engaging with us. So this is our third year doing this program. And what's really exciting is that this is a category competition. So we invite you to mix and play with any Cognac that you want to try, have loved in the past, old faves, new faves, maybe something that you try here. So really this is about the region. It's about this beautiful liquid and what makes it so special. So thank you. We're, as Speedrack, Ivy and I are just really proud to be able to be a part of this competition. So we are partnering with Cognac USA and VinePair teaming up to host this challenge. So important deadlines is you have until August 5th to enter your applications. That's less than 3 weeks. So I hope this is a day of that sparks inspiration for all of you. And we're just going to talk a little bit about your recipes here. So this is open to any professional bartender who will create an original cocktail with Cognac as the base. So you can find out more of the specific details about that on cognacconnection.com. So if you want to read through all of the different rules about your build for your cocktail. And that's for anyone who's been a bartender within the last 18 months. So that's kind of how we define professional bartender. 10 winners will receive a cash prize of $1,000 educational incentive. So what's really great about this, we've talked to lots of people in the past 2 years on what they were able to do if they put in towards education, building up their collection of Cognac tools, lots of great things. So this incentive was pretty incredible for our competitors. And the top 3 will actually win a trip to Cognac, France. So very exciting. That should be approximately in December of 2022. So stay tuned for those top 3. That is the extra goal here. So you can also earn points. One of the ways you're doing that is by watching the seminar today, whether you're watching our recording and you have not, if anyone has to drop off a little early, do not worry. This will be on the site for you to review, to go back and to learn and use as a resource. But you can also learn extra points by posting on Instagram with our hashtags and handles, Cognac USA and hashtag Cognac Connection. So just here's a bit about, let's go back to the last slide real quick, just to make sure everyone just has a moment to just really look at the criteria very quickly. So again, Cognac is the primary ingredient and the only base spirit. So you have lots of different other things to play with to bolster and showcase your Cognac cocktail. We don't want this to be, I love complicated, crazy drinks, but we would like you guys to focus on 6 ingredients and no more than 2 homemade ingredients. So it's a nice challenge. And if you kind of watch our sessions that we have on Instagram Live, you can learn from our past year's winners, different ways that they attacked thinking about making this cocktail and just kind of different ways you can be inspired. And the homemade ingredients must be pretty easy to replicate and creating in any bar program. So those are your details right there. Cognac cocktail recipe must have a name. If you're not good at naming, ask a friend to help you out. I for one, hate naming cocktails, but you can find some simple inspiration. And again, more information is available on the website. All right, this seminar will be approximately 90 minutes, and you want to watch it because we are going to give away the secret code. So Kelly will mention what the secret code for entry is. So whether you're watching this later, please watch the whole thing and you'll get your secret information that you need for your application. And again, just I hope you use what you learned here today from Kelly to inspire you to get your applications in. And we're going to be approximately 90 minutes. Again, if you have to drop off a little early, the recording will be on the website, so you can always come back and review and learn. And now I'm going to pass it off to our incredible cognac educator, Kelly Thorne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Lynette. Thank you, Ivy. Thank you, Cognac USA, for having me here today and for all of you being here today. My name is Kelly Thorne. I am a certified cognac educator. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also a beverage consultant and a WSET Level 3 spirits educator. Most of you, if not all of you, should have received a package with samples of cognacs in there, 8 of them. We're going to taste 8 cognacs today, so hopefully you'll have a chance to really kind of see the full spectrum of the cognac in there. And so go ahead and get those out and get your glasses ready. There will be a few times that we're doing some comparative tastings across 2 or 3 of them. So if you have a couple of glasses, great. If you don't, no worries. Please use the question and answer little box at the end for any questions that you have, and we'll answer those as we go along. Would we have received an email for receiving packages of samples? There we go. I'm gonna let the ladies from Cognac USA answer your questions as far as the samples go, but I believe you would have signed up for those and received an email, yes. Amazing, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. I think today when we're thinking about this seminar and what you should kind of go away from it with is that obviously I hope that it instills in you a deeper love of cognac and a better understanding of the category and of the region. But something to kind of think about, and especially when we're tasting today, is I really want you to consider where these flavors are coming from and the kind of vast spectrum of flavor that you get from cognac. And hopefully that'll inspire you a little bit for your cocktail creation when it comes time for this. And as we're tasting through them, I would love for you all to use the chat and really engage in the tasting process. Throw your tasting notes out there. It's not going to be, there's no wrong answer. So it's really just kind of what you're tasting along with me. Awesome. So next slide, please. We're going to watch a little video. Amazing. And on that previous slide, and just something for you to know, there is a wonderful website called at cognac.fr that is a wealth of information in addition to whatever you learned today if you'd like to do some additional studying on your own. So about cognac, next slide, please. The title cognac is technically applicable in 3 different ways, right? It's a large vineyard, it's a town, and it's a spirit produced from white wine grapes. And it's a brandy, essentially. All cognac is brandy, but not all brandy is cognac. It has to kind of come from the specific area. That large vineyard is divided into 6 subregions called crus. Cognac must be twice distilled, and it must be aged in oak for a minimum of 2 years to be called a cognac. Now, when you see aging statements on a cognac bottle, VS is a minimum of 2 years. That means that the youngest eau de vie in the bottle is 2 years old. VSOP is a minimum of 4 years old. So the youngest eau de vie in the bottle is 4 years old. And XO is a minimum of 10 years old. Next slide, please. So the cognac vineyard, as I mentioned, is large. It's covering around 78,000 hectares. And Cognac is the 4th largest French vineyard. It is the 2nd biggest wine producer in France. And it is the largest white wine producing and eau de vie vineyard in the world. And the region is in the southwest of France. It's about a 2.5-hour train ride from Paris, about 75 miles north of Bordeaux. Its west side faces the Atlantic Ocean, and the Charente River crosses through the region. Will you go to the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, the region is divided into sub-regions called crus, and this is the map of the crus here, kind of in these concentric circles, right? Beginning in the center with the darkest orange is Grand Champagne, not to be confused with the Champagne region in northern France. Right outside of that is Petit Champagne. That kind of lightest colored of orange, that's Borderies. That is the smallest cru within Cognac. And then the greens, the darkest green is Fin Bois. Outside of that is Bon Bois, and outside of that is Bois Ordinaire. These were defined by their soil types. In 1860, a well-respected paleontologist and geologist named Henri Cocan teamed up with an enologist, a taster in the region, and the two of them went around to different parts of Cognac, tasting eau de vies, studying the soils, and essentially came up with this soil classification. Now, we're going to dive a little bit more into those soils in just a bit, but the thing for you to remember right now is that if you see a cru mentioned on a label, then that means that all of the grapes are in that bottle are coming from that cru. So if you see Grand Champagne on a bottle, that means that all of the grapes in that bottle must come from Grand Champagne, Petit Champagne, Borderies, and so on and so forth. And if you don't see a cru, that often means that they're coming from different parts of crus within. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to just do a brief kind of overview of Cognac history. Again, if you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the Q&A chat below. So Cognac is really it has a storied history, right? And it goes back all the way to the 1st century. That is when we see vestiges of wine being first produced there. So we know that in the time of the Romans, they were producing wine in this area. And then it's always been kind of a wine producing area. In the 11th century, Cognac, we start to see the mentality of trade come through, right? There are all these Dutch sailors that are coming through to the area. They are picking up this renowned wine that's being grown there. They're also getting salt, and they're taking it back to their countries in Northern Europe. So we really start to see this kind of mentality of export and trade taking place within the region. Many centuries later, during the Renaissance, there's a lot more travel and exploration, along with development and modernization. And the King of France wants to establish industrial and agricultural reform. So he has some of those Dutch engineers that they've already formed this relationship. They've had a relationship for centuries because the Dutch have been coming through to kind of move into the area. And when they do this, the Dutch start to install stills along the Charente River. The initial stills that they installed were just single distillation stills. This would be because they still wanted to ship the wine up, but they didn't want to ship all the volumes. So they would ship the wine, distill it once, ship it outside to their countries. And then once they got it to their countries, they would essentially dilute it with herbs and water to kind of bring it back to its character. So this is going on for some time. And then they start to bring in around 17th century double distillation, and the French start to improve on this distillation. So now we're doing 2 distillations. This is also around the time that we're having shipping delays, and this spirit is sitting around in barrels waiting to be shipped off. And they start to see that it actually improves with this barrel contact, pardon me. So it's around that time that we also see barrels being introduced, and our first Cognac house is formed in 1643, and that is Cognac Auger. Actually, Cognac Auger still exists today. Come the 19th century, we see several more Cognac houses, including Courvoisier, Camus, Hardy. There's a lot of growth. This is when we start to move out of barrels and into bottles. We start to see things like labels and glass blowing machines being created in the area, and a lot more jobs. And it's really becoming a major industry for the region, right? So this is kind of going along for some time. And then in the 19th century, towards the end of it, we get this devastating blow to the region called phylloxera. And phylloxera is a little aphid that essentially attacks vines. And this is something that happened throughout Europe. So it wasn't just an issue within Cognac, but Cognac was devastated by it. They lost 86% of their vineyards in a matter of 2 decades. Only 14% of their vineyards were remaining after that. So they sent a gentleman named Pierre Viala to the United States to find rootstock that would survive in the really chalk-laden soils of Cognac. And believe it or not, they found this in Texas, brought these back and started to revitalize the Cognac production at that point in time. So we start to kind of come back from that. The vineyards are coming back around, and the 20th century really starts to bring a lot of progress and kind of organization within the region, right? So this is when they are like, we're going to protect this this product that we have that's very French and very much of this region. And they create an AOC. Essentially, they delimit the region. They create the rules of the AOC. The work that that Henri Cocon had done all the way back in 1860 is actually put into law. And in 1938, we get the delimitation of the Cruz. In 1946, we see the BNIC created. The BNIC is officially instituted. This is the Bureau National and Interprofessional du Cognac, and it was created to help protect cognac stocks during the Second World War. Today, it's a private institution financed by cognac professionals, and it's comprised of growers and merchants in equal parts. And they essentially structure the region, they protect it, and they educate on behalf of the region. And so they're essentially the reason that I'm here today. And in addition to that, they have also been recognized as a defense and management organization. And it was through their work that the 2015 kind of decree, essentially specification for Cognac eau de vie as a controlled appellation of origin, was officially recognized by French decree. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's get into what really makes Cognac Cognac in a lot of ways. So again, going back to these soils, when Henri Cocon was doing his research within this region, he essentially discovered that there were about 5 different soil types. Now, at one point in time, this area was completely underwater. And so what you have is a lot of marine fossils, and those marine fossils over time have really compacted with each other. And created this very chalky soil. Most of the soils within Cognac are comprised of chalk and clay and limestone. However, as you move through the region, and what you're going to kind of see with these pictures is that these compositions of clay and chalk, they vary greatly from cru to cru. Now, the companion soils are the chalkiest of these soils, and they're found in the Grand and Petit Champagne areas. So those 2 kind of center areas that we saw on the map with the Cruz. Within Grand Champagne, this is the chalkiest and most limestone driven soil throughout the entire region. Petit Champagne is very close to that. It's just has a little more of a maritime kind of influence. So in Grand Champagne, we're looking at these eau de vie that come from here are noted to be really floral, have a lot of finesse, but they also take a really long time to age. So they don't really hit their apogee until they're well into their decades and decades age old. Petit Champagne is almost the exact same way, just showing a little less finesse and aging just slightly quicker, but very similar in style. Now, a large part of the appellation is also covered in this thing that Henri Cocon called groise. And groise is essentially a combination of clay and limestone. And this is another soil. Now, we find a lot of this soil within the Borderies area and within Fambois. And it's kind of a mix of red clay stones and limestones that we find within Femme Bois. This particular area is noted for having kind of faster aging, fruitier, little bit rounder of eau de vie. Next slide, please. This kind of clay is also what you find in high content in the Femme Bois area. It's this clay in this Pays-Bas district. It's in the low-lying area. And this is, again, kind of contributing to this like fruitier characteristic, this faster aging characteristic. Now, the smallest of the crus is called Borderies, and it's on a plateau. It has clay soils, but lots of flint. And this is actually where they find the most fossils. These are the oldest soils within Cognac, dating all the way back to the Jurassic area. So there's like 2,000 fossilized remains that have been discovered in the area. Eau de vie from this particular cru is often noted for having a lot of kind of minerality and florality, more markedly often noted with violet or iris characteristics. They are said to age a little bit faster and be a little bit rounder. But even though often we kind of think of Grand and Petit Champagne as the like epicenter of Cognac, a lot of people are really starting to admire Borderies and its kind of mineral driven characteristics. Now, as we start to move even further out and we go out into Bon Bois and Bois Ordinaire, this is where we start to see a lot of sand getting introduced. We're starting to move closer to the ocean, a little more into the woods. So when it comes to Bon Bois, we're looking at much faster aging cognacs. And then when it comes to Bois Ordinaire, these vineyards are actually kind of growing coastal. They're growing among the maritime plants. Think kind of like beachy vibes. This is where Ile de Ré and Ile d'Orléans are, the two little kind of islands right off the coast of Cognac. So these are much faster aging spirits, eau de vie, and typically much kind of fruitier than what you find in the more chalk-driven soils further in. So with that said, we're actually going to take a moment and taste a couple of cognacs. Thank you. So we're going to do these. We can do them side by side. We're going to start with the Bosch Gabrielsen and the Pierre Ferrand. And I wanted to kind of show these right here because Bosch Gabrielsen is a blend of Femme Bois, Petit, and Grand Champagne. However, the majority of the blend, up to 75% of it, is actually coming from Femme Bois. So that area that has a lot of clay in that soil, that's a little like known for kind of producing these fruitier eau de vie, and then Pierre Ferrand is right in the center of Grand Champagne. So their cognacs are made 100% from Grand Champagne grapes, and that's where that soil is super chalky, lots of limestone. And so we're going to start with the Bosch Gabrielsen. Next slide, please. Excellent. So if you see here, so Bosch Gabrielsen was founded by a Norwegian man who named Thomas Bosch Gabrielsen, who came to Cognac in about 1903, fell in love with a French woman, as one does, and decided to set up shop and create his own cognac house. He founded that in 1905. Now, the thing about this bottle that you'll see that's kind of interesting, the Tres Coeurs means three crosses. So essentially, from 1916 to 1926, his home country, where he was shipping a lot of this cognac to, was undergoing prohibition. And the only liquor that you could get into the country was medicinal purposes, right? So another name for VS Cognac is a 3-star, which you'll see on your Pierre Ferrand bottle, are 3 little stars. That's another way that you can denote that something's a VS. So he cleverly kind of altered these 3 stars into 3 crosses, branded it as medicine, and was able to ship it to Norway during Prohibition. So pour some in your glass. Again, I would love to see everybody kind of contribute to this, throw your tasting notes out there. But essentially, when we're going in to taste cognac, the first thing that we want to do, or any spirit at that, is kind of, with our mouth open so that we don't injure our sensory, our very delicate noses. We want to kind of start to breathe in And think about what we're smelling here, right? So remember that this is a youthful cognac. It's coming mostly from Fambois. And to me, like right off the bat, this is like very Venice, right? It's like fresh pressed grapes. Yeah, green apple, exactly. There's all of this, like when we think about the fruit characteristics in a VS, we're typically looking at something that has, they're a little more fresh fruited, right? We're not getting a lot of dried fruit yet. Now, this is minimum age or of 2 years. They do blend older cognacs into this. This is very common practice. It's very rare that you get something that's all 2 years old whenever you're drinking a cognac that's has any kind of age statement on it. There's typically a whole vast array of blends of different ages in there. There is some older cognac in here, but I really think that you get a lot of this kind of like fresh, fruity characteristics, lots of like kind of those sorts of notes. And then of course, because this is a spirit that has to see oak, we're getting some vanilla, some spice. I'd love to see what else you guys are getting on the nose. Don't be shy. Okay, and then of course florality, because this is made from fresh apricot, fresh pear, big time stone fruit. Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, there's white flowers here, especially when it comes to like a VS. I typically get things like daisies present. All right, so let's taste. When we go to taste our cognac, first thing we want to do is take a really small sip, kind of move it around our mouth, let our bodies get used to it, spit that, and then I go in for my second one as kind of my evaluation of the spirit. Honeysuckle. So again, it has this brightness to it, this kind of fresh, fruity characteristic to it, right? Are those pear notes there? Are those peachy notes there? Are those kind of white floral and really fresh pressed grape notes there? I think so. This to me is such a like great expression to use in long drinks or anything kind of like bright and fruit driven, because it's all there. And there is that great like toasty kind of vanilla characteristic and soft bread characteristic. You're getting a lot of fruit on this particular expression. Do you want to throw anything else out? We're going to move on to Pierre Ferrand's. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So Maison Ferrand was founded in 1989 by Alexander Lambert. He is still, or Alexander Gabriel, sorry. And he is still overseeing all operations there. And they're located right in the center of Grand Champagne. And they really wanted to kind of look back to what cognac was in its heyday in the 1800s. And this is just something to make note of. If you look at really old cocktail books, as I'm sure many of us are to do, before there was whiskey really kind of reigning supreme in them, it was cognac. So the old fashions, the mint juleps, like cognac was right there with gin as one of the most utilized spirits within those books. And so what Pierre Ferrand does is tries to kind of go back to that, like what were they doing then, what were they made from? So this is actually kind of a cool project. The 1840 was in collaboration with Alexander Gabriel, as well as his cellar master Christian Guerin, and Dave Wondrich, the famed and lovely spirits and cocktail historian. They collaborated together on this cognac they basically kind of like tasted through a bunch of cognacs from the late 18th century, 19th century, and found this bottle from the year 1840. And wanted to mimic how it was made. So all from Grand Champagne, about 3 to 5 years here. And let's taste. Or let's smell first. And if you kind of think back to the Bosch Gabrielsen, where it was just kind of an explosion of fruit right off, there is definitely fruit here, right? We're looking at a fruit-based spirit. But what I think you get here, and you especially, and this is why I really wanted to kind of show you this one in its youth, is that when you get these, yeah, absolutely, there's kind of citrus peel here, right? And a little bit of dried citrus peel. But when you get these young spirits from the Grand Champagne and Petit Champagne area, you definitely get this kind of aroma of like chalk or petrichor or like wet cement, in addition to these fruit aromas and absolutely oak characteristics. So there is like almost like a little more earthiness and minerality here right off the bat on the nose. I mean, taste. And this is where that kind of chalky characteristic really comes through. As right on the palate, mid palate, you get this kind of drying petrichor, wet cement or concrete kind of characteristic, in addition to, like, you know, we'll touch a little bit more on some production in a few slides, but, you know, Pierre Ferrand uses a lot of, that is an interesting tasting note. I'm not sure that they're going to go with it, but I respect it. A lot of kind of lees are used in there, and they use heavy lees in their distillation. And again, we'll touch a little bit more on this, but that makes for a really kind of fleshy cognac. And when you go back and forth between these, there's a lot of weight here. There's a lot of kind of body here. And there's a lot of kind of deeper oak characteristics. Yeah, actually, absolutely. There is still fresh fruit character here, and there's still florality. It's just got a little, because of that soil type, there's just minerality that's coming through, and because of the way that they distill, there's a definite kind of weight and richness that is found in this one. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Okay. So we know that cognac is made from grapes. More specifically, it is made from white wine that has been made, that is originally made from grapes. Sorry, next slide, please. There are 6 grape varieties that are permitted in cognac production. However, the most widely planted, the most significant is Uni Blanc. It's also known as Trebbiano. It comprises of 98% of the vineyards in cognac. So it is the grape that re-established vineyards post-Phylloxera. And it's an ideal grape for spirit production for a handful of reasons. It has high yield, it matures late, but it also produces really fruity, low alcohol, and high acid wines. And the high acid is important because that helps to preserve the wines that await distillation, and the low alcohol enables a greater concentration of aromas present in the wine during distillation. So wines produced for cognac are typically between 7 and 11% ABV, never exceeding by law 12% ABV. Oh, and by the way, that's your code word, Uni Blanc. Make sure you spell it right. UGNIBLANC. All right, next slide, please. So cognac is produced through a distillation process called the Charentais. Oh, sure, it's UGNIBLANC. Uni Blanc. Column distillation is strictly, there we go, thank you. Column distillation is strictly prohibited in cognac production. Instead, all distillation is done using the Charentais method, which means that it's twice distilled in copper pot stills over an open flame. These have pretty much remained the same for centuries. The stills, the size, how they're made, and this operation. The boiler, the still head, the chapiteau, or known as the chapiteau, the swan neck, or what is known as coldestine, and the condenser coil, all must be made from copper. And there's a few reasons for this. This is a material that is great for conducting heat. It's malleable, but it's also a metal that can kind of trap sulfur compounds. So no matter what, during fermentation, sulfur is created. You can't really add any kind of sulfur to fermentation when making wine for cognac. That's why we use those low acid or high acid wines. But it is inevitably created. And so during distillation, we try to use these materials that kind of trap the sulfur into it so that we don't get that in the final product, because when you concentrate that, it smells really bad like eggs. So it must be made from copper. Now, it has to be done over an open flame, and this helps to create a lot of kind of rich flavors within a cognac. You get this extra opportunity for Maillard reactions and kind of deepen the flavors. It takes 9 liters of wine to make 1 liter of cognac. It's a lot of wine. Next slide, please. So this is done in batch distillation. We load our wine into our boiler, and this initial load may not exceed over 120 hectoliters. We turn on the heat and the liquid begins to heat up and boil, and vapor will rise to the still head, pass through the swan's neck, enter the condenser, while it will be turned back into the liquid. This first distillation is called the première chauffe, and the liquid that is collected is called the bruit. So those initial distillations that the Dutch were doing back in the day, that was essentially that they were initially shipping up. That was essentially bruit, right? This kind of cloudy, low ABV liquid. We call that an intermediate product when we're producing spirits. This intermediate liquid, we don't typically do any kind of cuts to. We're going to take that liquid and we're going to put it back into the pot, and we're going to start this distillation process all over again. Now, for the second distillation, this is where cognac is kind of interesting. Instead of 3 cuts, they actually produce 4 cuts. They have their heads cut, which starts to take place shortly into it, a few minutes. They have the heart, which is the eau de vie that's directly destined to go into barrel. Then they'd make 2 different cuts to their tails. They have the first part of the tails cut, which they call the secondes. And then they have the second part of the tails cut, which they call the tails. Now, the actual tails are almost always disposed of. They're not used in any kind of second distillation. The secondes contains a lot of additional ethanol, including some kind of richer fractions that can create a lot of flavor and characteristics for our final product. So at this point in time, our distiller is starting to make some decisions. You know, where is he going to cut at the seconds? And then are they going to recycle those seconds into the next batch of wine, which means it'll get distilled 2 more times and create a lighter spirit? Or is it going to be distilled into the bruit on the next batch, which will create a much richer spirit? Another decision that they can make at this point in time that really affects how our cognacs turn out is that during fermentation, there are byproducts, lees created, right? So these are dead yeast cells that are falling to the bottom of the tank during fermentation. There's also things like skins and flesh and seeds, and all of this is falling off. Now, all of that flesh and skins and seeds, those are called the gross lees, the bigger lees, right? And then those dead yeast cells are called the fine lees. Typically, a distiller will strain off the heavy lees every time, or the big lees, that skin and that flesh. But some distillers will keep those fine lees within the liquid that they're starting to distill. When we include the lees in the liquid that we're distilling, those dead yeast cells start to break apart during distillation in the heat of that, and they start to create all of these new kind of esters. And esters are where we get a lot of our fruity and floral characteristics. So when we include lees in our cognacs, we are ultimately going to be creating a kind of richer, more aromatic cognac. Now, different houses will do this to varying degrees. Some will only have a small amount of lees, some will use more lees. It just a lot of times depends on what that spirit's destined to be. If you're going to have a VS, you may not include as many lees, but if you're looking to something that's going to be aged for a long period of time, and all of those additional compounds can evolve over time in a barrel, then they may want to include more of those on there. It's really kind of up to them what they do, but these definitely influence the final product of what happens. The maximum ABV for an eau de vie coming off the still is 72.4%. This is a relatively low ABV. When you think about something like a vodka or any kind of higher proof spirit that comes off at about 96 proof, you're looking at something in that case that's going to be way more neutral because we've kind of distilled a lot of these compounds and fractions off. In the case of cognac, 72% ABV at the maximum, and a lot of people are going to distill below that. There's a lot of flavor and characteristics, lots of esters and fatty acids that are still present in that final cut. All distillation must be completed by March 31st following harvest. And the eau de vies that are coming off of these stills are typically very kind of fruity and floral, but also a little texturally unpleasant because they have all of these additional compounds left behind. All right, let's taste again. So the first one we're going to taste at this point is the Maxime Trijol Cognac. This was, oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up. We're going to taste 3 in a row on this one. All of the VSOPs. So we'll start with the Maxime Trijol, we'll move into the Nolde and the AE d'Or. Again, if you have the ability to kind of taste these all side by side, please do so. If not, no worries. Next slide, please. Okay, so Maxime Trijol has been around since 1859. They are a family-owned distillery, and these days they are being operated by the 6th generation of producers, and that is Sophie, the master distiller, and Pauline, the cellar master. So we're about to get into some lady-made cognac here. Now, this particular cognac is across cruise, so this is not cruise specific, which is, you can see that's not on the bottle. Minimum age of 4 years old as a VSOP. They do distill on lees. Now, they are known for including, they didn't really get into specifications, but they are known for including much older eau de vie into their all of their blends. And I think that, and again, that's very common. And I think that kind of right off the bat, you start to get these a little more developed, right? So we're moving away from those kind of bright and fruity characteristics that we got in the first eau de vie, and now we're starting to get some more developed. It's not all the way to a rancio moment, but we are getting kind of more dried fruits here, more dried flowers, more ripe kind of fruit characteristics. Again, I would love to hear what you all have to say here. But there's more of kind of a candied orange peel rather than a fresh orange peel. If we had kind of like fresh green apple before, now I think we're moving a little more into red apple. There's a lot of toasty characteristics, a lot of kind of like almond skin. But again, there's like ripe peaches and ripe strawberries kind of dancing across the palette here. Roasted or super ripe fruit. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of developed fruit characteristics here, and that's something that's you know, we're including lees here. So we're getting a lot of additional esters that are going in to this spirit. And as they start to age, that those esters are reacting with oxygen and they're reacting with oak, and they're starting to form new kind of flavor compounds. Well, so the thing about acid is technically it doesn't really come over on the still, but what you get are kind of brighter characteristics. And I think we're dealing with a high, when we look at the high acid, when we talk about high acid within the context of wine that's going to be distilled, it's not really that that acid's going to translate into the final product. We are looking for that high acid because it's a preservation. It preserves the wine. We can't use sulfur to preserve wine that's awaiting distillation. So we have to distill things that are higher in acid, and that acid keeps the wine fresh until we distill. But what I start to look for a lot of times, and what I sometimes feel like comes off as acid, are just very high tone fruit characteristics within a spirit such as this. Lots of red apple in there. I saw some cherry pit. Yeah. So the No was initially founded, that's the next one, rose petal. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that one, I really think that Maxime Trujoul has a lot of really beautiful kind of floral characteristics to it, right? There is rose petal. It's not necessarily like potpourri, but there is these like really kind of soft petal notes, really great ripe fruit characteristics, really great kind of toasty oak characteristics to it. So the No is the next spirit that we'll taste. No was initially founded in 1923, and it is now operated by a fifth generation of the family. This is also distilled on the lees. So minimum age for the Maxime Trujoul was 4 years. Here we're looking at a VSOP. So even though 4 years is the minimum age, they're actually going somewhere between 5 to 11 years for this particular spirit. And the crus represented here are Fembois, Bombois, and Bois Ordinaire. So these are all kind of the faster aging areas, the fruitier kind of characteristics. Again, Fembois has all that clay, Bombois and Bois Ordinaire, we're starting to see a lot of sand incorporated into it. And obviously there's still going to be chalk because that's throughout the region, but it's just not as dense in these areas. I just saw somebody put fig and vanilla in. Absolutely. It's kind of like a fleshy, like ripe fig for me rather than a dried fig, but there's lots of kind of vanilla characteristics on the palate. You get this kind of gripping tannic note right on the sides here, right? And a little bit of like a deeper kind of toastier. I think that there was like nice almond skin characteristics with Maxime Trujoul. This one, I'm starting to get kind of deeper, toastier notes kind of incorporated. I mean, this does probably have a little bit more age on it. There's a little more oak characteristic coming through, a little bit more starting to move towards those more developed fruit characteristics again, which is what we'll see as we continue to taste these older cognacs. And again, this is something that was distilled on the lees. So this is something that is inherently a richer spirit. It is going, all of this lees contact allows for more kind of character, a lot more texture as well. If you guys kind of think back on Pierre Ferrand, just to go back to that for a moment, and if you have some left and you want to taste it, Pierre Ferrand is one of the only distilleries that I'm aware of that uses the gross lees, the big lees, whenever they are distilling. So they're actually including like flesh and skin in their distillations. So, and I think that you really get like that kind of weightiness. And with this one, you know, no one's telling me exactly how much lees they're using, but I would say that they're using, you know, quite a bit of lees. It'd be interesting to see if all of their blends have lees, or if some of them they go a little bit lighter. But I think that there is a kind of richer characteristic here. And none of that is to say that one's better than the other, right? Like, that's the beauty. What we're looking at, the way cognac is produced, like everyone's pretty much using the same grape varietals. Everyone's distilling in the exact same way, as far as that they have to use these stills that are made out of copper. They have to double distill. They have to use an open flame. But then they can start to get creative, right? So like the lees, where they're recycling the seconds, when they're making their cuts, these are the decisions. And what we're really going to see in a few slides is what's taking place in the cellar. What kind of oak characteristics are they, or oak are they using, and for how long are they aging? So that is the null. And then finally, we're going to end with the AE door. So the AE door, again, this is, they were founded in 1858, currently being run by Pierre-Antoine Rivière. And when they first originated, they were looking for older stocks of cognacs. They actually have a huge cellar of older stock cognac. The minimum age for this particular spirit is 8 years old. And this is labeled as a Fiend Champagne. And I don't think I covered this earlier. So Fiend Champagne is not a separate cru. It is an AOC. It means that the grapes come from both Grand Champagne and Petit Champagne, but at least 50% of the grapes have to come from Grand Champagne. So it's a blend of those two crus, but at least 50% have to come from Grand Champagne. So these are coming, this is coming straight from the heart of cognac. Minimum age 8 years old at this point in time. This to me is, there's so much kind of like creme brulee here, right? Some like caramelized sugar characteristics, and almost like a feeling of creaminess on the palate. And for me here, yeah, banana. Those are esters for you. So esters are when fatty acids and alcohols react with each other. It happens during fermentation within the cell. And that's these two compounds kind of, they interact with each other and they create these esters. And again, esters are where we get so many of our fruity and floral flavors. And so when you get those like crazy banana characteristics, it can come from yeast sometimes, but in this case, it's definitely coming from the ester and the esterification that's taking place in the still. Yeah, but it has like these. The truth is that you know, I'm careful to say sweet because sweetness is only something that's added post distillation, but that kind of idea of sweetness, the perception of sweetness that we get, there's a little bit of like anise characteristic here. There's that creme brulee characteristic. There's that aromas of bananas and kind of deeper fruit characteristics that are coming through because we're starting to integrate the oak, and we have all of these new compounds being developed as we're continuing on with our age process here. Yes, I like this one a lot too. I mean, I haven't had a bad one yet. Yeah, lots of we're moving away from just like fresh herbs and fresh flowers and starting to get into some of these like spice characteristics and almost like licorice characteristics. Does anybody want to throw anything else out there? Did anybody go back and retaste the Pierre Ferrand, thinking about kind of the richness of the palette, knowing now that they're using these like kind of heavier lees on there, which are ultimately, I mean, and the truth is that they're a distillery that kind of uses a lot, they use 12 different stages of lees inclusions. If that kind of gives you an insight to how important that particular element of cognac production is. Okay, well, let's move on. Next slide, please. So, in general, there are 40 olfactive zones characterized within cognac. This is kind of a neat little picture guide for you, but bananas, pears, strawberries, those are all things that we're getting from our esters, our yeast, and then you have florality, herbs, and then, of course, vanilla, which is going to be coming from our oak characteristics, honey characteristics, and then marmalade. Next slide, please. Okay, so after we've distilled, as I mentioned, distillation season ends March 31st, right? So if it's distilled after March 31st, it's not allowed to be called cognac. No one's doing that anyway, but that's when it ends, March 31st. By April 30th, following harvest, all of that spirit has to be within barrel, right? Because by law, we have to age cognac for at least 2 years. Now, when your distillation ends on March 31st, that gives you a whole lot of the year to be doing something, right? And in the case of cognac, that is spent in the cellar. And some would argue that this is like really where cognac is born, right? The aging and blending process is so important. The role of the cellar master is so important. French oak is the tradition. There are 2 types traditionally used. You can go to the next slide, actually, sorry. And only the heart of each of these trees are used. There about 20% of this tree is used. They have to kind of make sure that it's the most straight part of it. They are going to cut this into moraines or staves. And you can kind of see this center picture here down below on the 3. They stack them into these pallets and allow them to dry or season from anywhere from 24 to 36 months. The truth is that technically it could be done within a year, but most producers are allowing this to go up to 3 years. And what this does is it, first of all, it allows for all of the moisture to kind of come out. I'm going to make sure that if they don't get it to a certain level of moisture, then when they put the barrel together, there will be leaks. So they're doing that. But the other thing that they're doing is something called it's seasoning. So they're leaving this outside and they're allowing this to be exposed to the elements. And this is kind of starting to wash away a lot of the harsh tannins that are present in the oak, and it's starting to break down some of these macromolecules that'll make it a little bit easier for our cognac to digest these elements of the oak whenever it goes into it. And then another thing that's really important about where we get kind of our aromatics from our barrels is how are they being coopered, you know, how deep is the toasting and what have you. So the 3 kind of things that are important when it comes to the oak is, you know, the type, which we'll talk about in just a second, this drying and maturation, and the cooperage techniques. Next slide, please. So the flavors that we get from oak, because a spirit is not static, right? When it goes into a barrel, it starts moving around. It's moving in and out. And every time it's entering these staves, it's pulling compounds out. And that's where we get our color compounds. This is where we get compounds like vanilla, eugenol, our spice characteristic, oak lactones, kind of coconut characteristics. That's where all of this comes, because it's moving in and out. The tannins, wood sugars, lignans, all of these are compounds that are within the oak, and the cognac is pulling out. The newer the barrel, the more rich they are in these extractables. French oak is considered to be really high in these extractables, so they kind of consider their barrels new up to 1 or 2 uses. But no matter what, at a certain point, these extractables begin to diminish a bit. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the toasting, we're not really ever seeing anything that's charred with these. So as they are, they're forming these barrels, they're not using wood or glue. They take these meringues after they've seasoned for a length of time. They cut them and then they're kind of heating them to shape them and putting these metal hoops around them to hold them together. And then they're going to toast them to a certain degree. Lighter toast will give you kind of that more almond skin and soft kind of clove characteristics. As we go a little bit to that medium or long heat, we start to get more of those vanillin characteristics, and the higher heat is a little smokier, a little more intense. Again, they don't char, so like you don't really see, there are a few producers out there that use an alligator char, but that's really rare. Most of them are just toasting to these various degrees, but some of them will toast to a heavier degree. Next slide, please. The two, again, French oak is tradition, and there's two main types of oak. There's the big grain. This is coming from the Limousin forest. This is a natural forest. They're kind of able to grow on their own, and the grain is much wider. Now, with this, when the spirit's moving in and out, there's more for them to kind of absorb. So you get a lot more tannins in these, in this kind of oak, and just more oak presence. The other type of oak is called fine grain. It's from the Tronchet forest. This forest was specifically built for timber, initially for war, and then Cognac took over, so make Cognac and not war. But this is a finer grain. It's typical to do a lighter toasting on this. It's softer. It's not going to impart as many of those tannic characteristics. So depending on, you know, what the producer is trying to accomplish, they might use a wider grain or a finer grain. Some producers and a lot of producers will use both kinds. Next slide, please. Oh, well, before we get there, something to note is that in addition to these, to this grain, the conditions of the cellar are also really important, right? So there's two different kinds of cellars. There's humid cellars and dry cellars. Depending on what kind of style of spirit the producer wants to create, they will put them in these different cellars, and a lot of times they use both. If you go to a dry cellar, you typically, more water evaporates, your alcohol levels rise, and you create a spicier and drier spirit. When you are in a humid cellar, more alcohol evaporates and you get these kind of rounder, more tropical fruit driven spirits. Again, a lot of producers will rotate these barrels from different cellar types. Initially, our Cognac only sees anywhere from about 3, 6 to 12 months in brand new oak. We don't really want that oak characteristic to cover up all of the fruit characteristics. So it'll only go into these barrels for a short period of time. And then we start to move our spirits into progressively older barrels. And this is what we call barrel rotation. And this is kind of done in coops, depending on how long it's going to be aged. And that is, again, part of like the importance of this cellar master is they're constantly tasting this. They're constantly moving them around and remarrying them. So it just, what makes a difference in the cellars? Yeah, it's like location. So some of them are a little buried further down, the closer to the water, they're going to have a little more humidity to them. It's really just about where they're kind of locating them and how they're building them, as far as if they're more humid or more dry cellars. And again, a lot of producers will have kind of different cellar conditions for these spirits to be moved in and out of. And some are just dedicated to straight humid cellars, and some only have dry cellars. And then sometimes when you ask a producer, they're like, I don't know, it's kind of in between. So there's a lot of variables when it comes to these sorts of things. Okay, let's taste Larsen. So this is kind of cool. We're going to taste the Larsen Aqua Ignis and the Hardy Legend next. Larsen was founded by another Norwegian. In this case, it was Jens Rader. And they have a really interesting approach to this particular expression. They're using a technique called triple bracero steam toasting. where they're taking each cask and it's plunged into hot water and then toasted over fire. And they do this 3 times. They state that by doing this, they are enhancing certain aromatic characteristics within this spirit and eliminating some of the more like harsh tannins and smoky aromas, allowing for a greater aromatic complexity. Now, it should be noted that they actually start their barrels or start their spirit in newly toasted barrels and then later move them into these steamed barrels. So they do spend a bit of time in just traditional French oak barrels. They are using fine grain barrels and they are using a lighter toast. They do use lees, but they don't use a lot. So we're looking at where comparatively Pierre Ferrand, Nald are using, quite a bit of lees in their production. Larsen Aqua Ignis is using less lees. This is a fine grain toast. They're a non-age statement, but they fall somewhere between a VSOP and an XO. And their whole goal is to really maintain the kind of bright fruitiness of their eau de vie. They're coming from Femme Blanc, Bon Blanc, again, with the intention to produce these very fruity eau de vie. So somebody just put that it's very floral, and I agree. I think you're getting, but what you're getting here is kind of like honeysuckle and rose petal and a little bit of almost like linden flower, and then, but the fruit's really great, and there it's very like ripe and bright fruit. There's almost like a stewed strawberry characteristic. And while there is nuttiness here, for me, it's starting to come into this kind of hazelnut characteristic. White peach, yeah. Oh, did I miss a question? Oh, what characteristics are they trying to enhance? Well, what they're essentially trying to do with this is really focus in on the fruit characteristics. So for them, what I think that their goal was less about what they're trying to enhance and more about what they are trying to avoid. So in their opinion, by doing this Bracero triple steam process, they are reducing kind of harsher tannins and like smokier characteristics. They're already doing a light toast, but in their opinion, this kind of takes away this triple steam process is taking away some of the harshest tannins and therefore not covering up the more delicate and fruit characteristics. So they're just trying to make sure that the fruit and the florality are taking center stage at this on this spirit rather than but obviously like the oak is still very important. And when we're hanging out in a barrel, it's not just that these compounds are being taken on by by the eau de vie, there's also all of these additional chemical compounds taking place. There's oxygen entering the barrel, and this is creating additional reactions, including additional esterification over time. So all of these new flavor compounds are being created, especially with the marriage of oak and eau de vie. I don't think that they're necessarily, I mean, they're kind of allowing time to do its thing as far as that's concerned, but their goal was to allow the most like fruit driven and floral characteristics to shine through rather than oak tannins. Does that help? Awesome. Okay. So this is cool because, yeah, it does have nice baking spice. We're going to taste the Hardy next. And this is, this house was founded in 1863. This particular spirit is the eau de vie are from Petit Champagne, Framboise, and Borderies. Again, this is a non-age statement, but we're looking at eau de vie that's up to 12 years old. They could call it an XO, but that's not really Hardy style because they do really much older blends in their XOs. And they are using dark toasting, and they are using wide grain oak. So whereas before we had light toasting, we had this triple brasero kind of process, we had fine grain in the Aqua Ines. Here we are looking at wide grain, heavy toasting. And again, average age of 12 years old. They have a color on their paper. That's awesome. And kind of right off the bat for me, like some of the first notes that jump off are these kind of like chocolate characteristics. It's like coconut and a little bit of coffee, and you know, these kind of like toasty, roasty notes that immediately, yeah, and I think that that's where that's coming from, Jessica, that malty characteristic. It's like a roasty characteristic, right? These are some of the first things that jump out of the glass to me. And then I go, and I start going further, and this is where it is starting to get a little more of that dried flower, like potpourri, a little touch, but not quite, of like sandalwood and cedar. Absolutely, baked brown sugar. So we're still getting those creme brulee characteristics, those kind of deep brown sugar characteristics. But what about fruit? It's still there, right? There's still fruit here. But what is the fruit characteristic like? Is it fresh? Or are we starting to get more dried characteristics, like dried fruit, cooked fruit, more developed kind of fruit notes as we're getting into this older spirit and we're going into these heavier toes? I like that baked caramel apple. Yeah. This is where the figginess starts to come in. I agree. But it's kind of like, have you ever had figgy toffee pudding? That's what it reminds me of. It's like toffee, like cooked figs, had kind of like creaminess to it. Again, like this great kind of coffee note comes along. Baked black cherry, right? And that's the thing, when we're looking at like where we started at the beginning of this and we were tasting these younger cognacs, as we progressively go on, you start to really like see how these fruit, these flavors develop, right? And the other thing to note here is that while this is still has oak characteristics, we're starting to see a development of oak characteristics, right? So before it might be like, oh, it's toasty, it has some of this nutty characteristics. Now we're starting to see like this marriage of this eau de vie and this oak, this oxygenization, this time is starting to take place. We're starting to see all these new flavor compounds that are being developed through this. And it's less about like this one thing and more about the greater sum of its parts, right? It's tasting like this that makes me really excited to share with people the versatility of cognac, because you really can, more so than most spirits. It's like it is so versatile. It will go into a refreshing and light cocktail. It can, because it has baking spice characteristics, go into those tropical driven island type cocktails. It can also be that stirred, rich, spirit forward cocktail. You know, it can do all of these things more so than I think a lot of spirits can. And it's always fun to taste in this way because you really start to get a feel for what that's like. Okay, next slide, please. So aging. I've kind of been touching on this a little bit. When we first see barrel, our spirit is first kind of pulling these compounds out of the oak. This extraction is taking place. But along with extraction, we see this oxidative aging. Alcohol is diminishing through evaporation. The more volatile compounds are kind of floating off. And as oxygen is moving in and reacting with these components, we're starting to see new components being developed. And especially when we have a spirit that's included a lot of leaves on it, there's all of these additional opportunities for these new esters to be created, and for these aromatic powers to increase, right? New molecules are basically being created. It's really magical. Like, we don't exactly understand the science that's happening in there, but we know that all of these new flavors, all of these new compounds are being created. The oak gives way to kind of vanilla flavors, floral notes, fruit flavors deepen and they develop. And then we begin to see flavors of rancio appear. And rancio isn't something that's exactly understood. We just know that after a period of time, usually around 10 years old, and in the case of something like a Grand Champagne or a Petit Champagne, typically much older, but in a lot of cognacs around 10 years old, you start to see these aromas and characteristics of rancio appear. And they are often noted with things like deep hazelnut characteristics, curry spices, dried flowers, tobacco, leather, and forest floor is always one. To me, sometimes if it's really old, you get things like soy sauce. But the thing that I also think is really cool is that it's not just about the aroma of like decay, it's also these very developed like tropical fruit characteristics. So you might get something like caramelized pineapple, like really ripe mango. The truth is that that's how cool rancio is it kind of shows itself in a lot of different ways, and it can go anywhere from these like mushroomy kind of forest floor characteristics all the way to these like deep tropical note characteristics. At a certain point, these reactions, they kind of hit their apogee. No more reactions will occur. And at that point in time, the spirit is moved into a glass bottle, like a big glass bottle, and it's called a demijohn. And that is stored in the paradis, the section of the cellar where the oldest spirits are stored. And at this point in time, wherever the spirit lands, if it's a VS to VSOP to XO to something that's hanging out in the paradis, one of the most important things, again, goes back to this cellar master. And eau de vies are rarely one or two eau de vie, or cognacs are rarely one or two eau de vies. Typically, you're looking at blends that are anywhere from a couple dozen to like 30, 40 eau de vies blended. I mean, think of this more as they are creating a perfume. It's a symphony of notes. They're constantly kind of creating this sense of harmony. And this is not something that's taught in a textbook. This is generational information. This is passed from one creator to one cellar master to another. And they're kind of managing and monitoring these coupes and then tasting these spirits and deciding what's going to go into these blends, deciding what's going to be kind of go on to an older aging process. Next, please. So yeah, I just kind of went through this. We'll go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So the final one we're going to taste today is a single vineyard spirit, which is really cool. This is created by Cognac Park. We're looking at their single vineyard XO, and it's around 20 years old. And so definitely starting to move into those more developed Rancio characteristics. Now, remember that if this were a 20-year-old Grand Champagne or Petit Champagne, it may not have really started to hit its apogee because those particular crus are known for a little bit longer aging. But we're looking at Borderies, which is a faster aging. This is, again, that kind of micro, it's the smallest cru within the Cognac region. And the soil there is really special and different. It's also the coldest. It has its own little microclimate. Excellent. Okay, great. So we're on the last cognac. We have 10 minutes to spare. We'll taste this together and I'll answer any additional questions that you have. Okay. Milk chocolate and dried purple flowers. This is starting to show those kind of like hints of that sandalwood and cedar, these kind of more incensed wood characteristics that are almost exotic. Again, it comes back to this kind of nice, deep chocolatey characteristic, but it's not in the same kind of roasty way that we saw with Hardy. It's a little creamier, it's a little softer. And again, for me, there's just such a like explosion of this deep, like dried petal kind of potpourri florality. Don't make me give all the notes. Yeah, I mean, Anastasia, this particular region is known for being for producing really floral. The sub-region is known for producing really floral eau de vie, mineral driven and floral. Those kind of the notes that you always get when you're talking about Borderies, and in particular violets and iris. What I think we're seeing here, and yeah, and ginger, Diego, by the way, is a very like common, and there is like a spicy kind of ginger characteristic here, very common kind of spice note when we're starting to look at these spicier Rancio characteristics coming through. When we're getting into this 20-year mark, we start to get more of these kind of spice characteristics such as ginger, such as kind of curry spice, right? And these deeper fruit characteristics. And there's so much beautiful like florality here that you have to be like, okay, stop talking about all the flowers and let's talk about the fruit. But there's definitely a lot of kind of plummy fruit here, deeper, more developed peaches to me, like very ripe, almost stewed peaches. And then you got this great little orange marmalade, like candied orange peel. but it's jasmine, it's violets, it's irises. It's so, there's so much florality present on this particular spirit. Okay, so I did see a couple of questions come up in the Q&A. Yeah, I like that. That's a great description for the spirit. And so would you please give us a quick description of Cognac cellars? So they're not ever really, it depends from producer to producer on how these cellars are formatted. A lot of them are, you're not really looking at like so you're not looking at something like in bourbon production where they're going straight up and building these huge racks. Remember that you're not really, so in productions like bourbon and rye whiskey and American whiskey production, it is rare to see barrel rotation. I'm not saying that no one does it. I know that they do, but it's not something that is commonly done. Typically, once it goes into barrel, it's kind of there. So it's okay for them to rack them up really high, and then they kind of figure out, you know, what part of the cellar or warehouse is going to age like what. Remember that in cognac production, these barrels, there's a lot of rotation. This spirit's being moved out of the barrel. It's being moved into another barrel and being married. So they're not building large racks to go up. A lot of these are kind of on shorter racks around the cellar. They are typically, there's not a temperature control taking place. And it is left more to the elements. But again, I can't speak for every single producer, just the ones that I have visited. You do not see them built up into racks. They're more like shorter racks or just large barrels kind of on the ground all around. And they're not typically like temperature controlled the way that you would see in something like a whiskey production. Because again, they're moving these around constantly. Cellar management is one of the most important elements to the production of these spirits. Does that help? Does anyone have any other questions right now? Well, team, we did a great job of tasting through 8 spirits and going through a lot of information. I'm going to bring Ivy back on in just a moment, but I did want to let you know, I wanted to remind you a few things. The Uni Blanc is the code word for this particular seminar. We are going to be emailing you a questionnaire. If you could please so kindly fill that out. It'll only take you a few minutes and we greatly appreciate it. We really appreciate your time and attention today. And I'm gonna let, would you prefer a drier or fruitier cognac? Like me personally? Well, I think that cognacs can be both dry and fruity. So it's hard for me to say, oh my gosh, when you literally taste like hundreds of cognacs, it's hard to say that I have a favorite. I do like, I tend to really love when a cognac is at a certain age, especially an XO, and has like really bright tropical fruit characteristics. I just find that such a delight. I think that people, when they go in and they start to drink something that's 50 or 60 years old, they think it's going to be all like, you know, leathery and tobacco. And when you get something that's just like a fresh explosion of tropical fruit and flowers over your palate, like that's, you know, I'm really into that. So it also just depends, you know, if I'm looking to do something that is going to be stirred and rich, and I want to use like chocolate flavors and coffee flavors, then I'm going to look for something that's a richer style of cognac that can hold up to that. If I'm looking for a bright and refreshing cocktail, if I want to use like melons or fruit or something like that, then I'm going to look for a fruitier, brighter cognac. So I guess it just depends. Thank you guys so much for your time and attention. Ivy, I turn it to you, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. One of my favorite things to do is listening to Kelly talk about cognac. Talk about anything really, but particularly talking about cognac is one of my favorite things. Thank you all for joining us today. A lot of information there. A big pillar of Speed Rack, as Lynette mentioned, is education. And one of the greatest things that one of our favorite things about joining with the BNIC to do the Cognac Connection is this important aspect of education within the Cognac Connection. Not too much to say here, just to remind everyone that just about every Wednesday we do Instagram Lives that are also very insightful and informative. Tomorrow I am doing one with Jacob Latiski, talking about the creativity process of mixing and creating cocktails with cognac. It's very helpful to tune into the Instagram Lives to kind of ask people how their creative process was, how they plan on going forward, and what they recommend. There's only 3 weeks left to enter the Cognac Connection, so make sure you get to it. Again, you can win $1,000, which who doesn't need that? And you can also win a trip to Cognac, which I'm personally very much looking forward to. If you're coming to Tales of the Cocktail, we have the Speed Rack Redemption, our 10-year anniversary competition happening on the 24th. For more information, you can go to speed-rack.com. I think that's it. And Kelly, thank you so much. Thank you to the whole BNIC team, everyone from TUIN who helps us put this together. Thank you guys for educating yourselves, and just drink more cognac, I think is the final message.
Thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you, Ivy and Lynette and everyone at TUIN. Thank you.
Bye.